I've worked as a nurse in a psychiatric hospital for 23 years. 23 years caring for people society prefers to forget, people who live in worlds no one else can see. And I've learned one thing in all this time: there's a huge difference between hallucination and vision. I know it sounds crazy to say that, I know my entire training taught me the opposite, but after what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've experienced with my own eyes, I have no more doubts. Some of these patients aren't just delusional. Some of them are seeing things that we, those who call ourselves sane, simply can't see. And the most frightening thing of all is that the stories repeat themselves. Patients who never met each other, who arrived in different years, who have completely different diagnoses, tell the same story. They describe the same presence. They point to the same corner of the room. And always, in the last days before they pass away. If you're feeling this way with me right now, stop everything, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below about where you're listening from and what time it is there, because the next story will change everything forever. The first time I noticed a pattern was with Mr. Antonio, a 62-year-old man who had been hospitalized for severe schizophrenia. He arrived at the hospital in a terrible state, completely disconnected from reality, talking to himself, thrashing about, shouting things that no one understood. It took us weeks to stabilize him with medication. Gradually, he started to recover. He began to recognize people, answer questions, and eat on his own. It was a beautiful recovery to witness. But then something strange started happening. Every night, around 3 in the morning, Mr. Antonio would wake up screaming. And it wasn't just any scream, you know. It was a scream of absolute terror, the kind that sends chills down your spine, that makes everyone in the hallway stop what they're doing. I would run to his room and always find the same scene, him sitting on the bed, sweating profusely, his eyes wide and fixed on the left corner of the room, near the wardrobe. And he would point. He always pointed. "She's right there," he said, trembling. "She won't leave. She just keeps staring at me." I turned on all the lights, showed that there was no one around, sat next to him, and held his hand. "Mr. Antonio, you are safe. There is no one here but me." But he shook his head, insisting. "Yes, there is. It's a woman. She's old, wearing a dark blue dress, her hair is tied up in a bun. And she doesn't speak. She just stands there, looking at me with a sad face. This happened for 5 nights in a row. Always the same time, always the same song, always the same description." I mentioned it to the doctors. They increased his medication. They thought it was residual effects of the psychosis. But Mr. Antonio was lucid all day long. He talked normally, made jokes, played checkers with the other patients. It was only at night that it came back. On Friday night, I decided to do a test. At 2:30 in the morning, before he woke up screaming, I entered his room quietly and sat there in the chair next to the bed, in the dark, just observing. I wanted to see with my own eyes what was happening at that exact moment. And wow, at exactly 3 o'clock, I saw it. I saw Mr. Antonio slowly open his eyes, without screaming, without struggling. He just looked at the corner of the room and whispered, "Hi, Mom." My heart raced. I turned on the light immediately and asked, "Mr. Antonio, what did you say?" He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "It's my mother, nurse." I didn't want to say anything because I thought you'd think I was going crazy again. But it's her. I'm sure of it. She died 15 years ago, but it's her. She's wearing that dress she was buried in, the blue one she loved so much. And her hair, always like that, you know. She doesn't say anything, but I know what she wants. She came to get me. I didn't know what to say. I sat there, holding his hand, and all I could manage to say was, "Are you afraid?" He thought for a moment and replied, "At first I was. But not anymore. She's my mother, you know. She wouldn't hurt me." 3 days later, Mr. Antonio died. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, in the early morning, without pain, without struggle. When I entered the room in the morning and saw that he was gone, the first thing I looked at was the left corner, near the wardrobe. There was nothing there, of course. But I felt it. I felt that something had happened that I couldn't explain. That stayed in my head for weeks. I didn't tell anyone because I knew they'd think I was crazy too. But I started paying more attention. I began writing down the things the patients said at night, especially those who were terminally ill or very debilitated. And that's when I realized, it wasn't just Mr. Antonio. There were other people seeing things. And the stories were too similar to be a coincidence. But I still had no idea of the magnitude of what was to come. The second story that struck me was that of a patient named Claudia. She was 38 years old and had been hospitalized after a suicide attempt followed by a severe psychotic episode. Claudia had suffered from deep depression for many years and had finally reached a breaking point. When she was admitted to the hospital, she was completely dissociated. She didn't speak, she didn't eat, she didn't react to anything. It was as if she had given up on being alive. It took almost 2 months of intensive treatment before she started responding. And when she came back, it was difficult. She cried all the time, said she wanted to die, that she saw no meaning in anything. It was heartbreaking. But we kept going, didn't we? We continued caring for her, talking to her, medicating her, trying to bring her back to life. Until one night, around midnight, I went to her room to check if everything was all right, and she was sitting on the bed, looking out the window. But it wasn't a vacant look, you know. It was a fixed, attentive gaze, as if she were seeing someone on the other side of the glass. I approached slowly and asked, "Claudia, is everything all right? What are you looking at?" She didn't take her eyes off the window. And then she spoke, in a voice so soft I could barely hear her, "There's a girl out there." I looked out the window. We were on the 3rd floor. There was nothing outside but darkness and the parking lot below. "What girl, Claudia?" "She's waving at me," Claudia said. "She's small, she must be about 6 or 7 years old. She's wearing a white dress. She's smiling." My stomach churned. I stood there, not knowing what to do, and then I asked, "Do you know her?" Claudia finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "She's my sister," she said. "She died when I was 10. She was run over in front of our house. I've never forgotten her face." I sat on the bed next to her, and we stayed there in silence for a while. Then Claudia spoke again. "She wants me to go with her." "And do you want to go?" I asked, afraid of the answer. Claudia remained silent. And then, for the first time in months, she smiled. "I don't know. But she's so happy over there. She doesn't seem scared or sad. She seems at peace." From that day on, Claudia changed. She stopped crying all the time. She started talking more, participating in group therapy, and eating properly. And every night, without fail, she would look out the window for a few minutes before going to sleep. I would ask if she was still seeing her sister, and she always said yes. She comes every night. Just to see me. So I know she's okay. A month later, Claudia was discharged. She improved so much that the doctors thought it was safe to let her go home. On the day she left, she hugged me tightly and said, "Thank you for not thinking I was crazy when I told you about my sister. Knowing that she's on the other side, waiting for me, that gave me a reason to stay here. Because now I know that when my time comes, I won't be alone." I was deeply moved. And I started to think, could these visions be a gift? Could they be a form of comfort that we don't yet understand? But nothing prepared me for what I was about to hear. The third story was the strangest of all up to that point. There was a patient in the hospital named Jorge, a 71-year-old man with advanced Alzheimer's. He practically didn't speak anymore, didn't recognize anyone, and lived in a state of almost permanent mental confusion. His family visited him every week, but he no longer knew who they were. It was sad to see. But one night, Jorge started shouting. It wasn't a shout of fear, it was a shout of excitement, almost of joy. I ran to his room and found him sitting on the bed, his eyes wide and his hands outstretched, as if he were trying to grab something. And he talked non-stop, things that didn't make sense to me, but he spoke with a clarity I hadn't seen in him for months. You came. You really came. I knew you hadn't forgotten me. I approached slowly. Mr. Jorge, who are you speaking to? He looked at me as if I were invisible and pointed to the air in front of him. Everyone's here. My father, my mother, my brother Pedro, even Toto's here. He laughed, a genuine laugh, full of happiness. Look at Toto, everyone. He hasn't changed a bit. I was paralyzed. Toto was the name of the pet dog he had as a child. I knew this because his daughter had told me once, when she was talking about her father's old memories. But Jorge hadn't spoken about these things in years. How was he remembering now? I stood there, watching, and Jorge continued talking to the air for almost 20 minutes. He laughed, he cried, he made gestures as if he were hugging someone. And then, suddenly, he stopped, looked ahead with an expression of astonishment and whispered, "It's so beautiful, it's so beautiful." He lay back down on the bed, closed his eyes, and remained silent. I thought he had fallen asleep. But when I went closer to check, I realized he was gone. His heart had stopped. He had died right there, in that moment, with a smile on his face. I was in shock. I called the medical team, we went through all the procedures, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just witnessed. That man, who didn't even know his own name anymore, had suddenly become completely lucid in his last minutes of life. He had recognized people who had been dead for decades. He had seen his dog. I did some research later. I discovered there's even a name for it, terminal lucidity. It's a phenomenon where people with dementia or Alzheimer's fully regain mental clarity shortly before dying. Science still doesn't fully understand how it happens. But it does happen. I saw it with my own eyes. And what scared me the most was thinking, if Jorge really regained his lucidity, then everything he said was real to him. He truly believed that his father, mother, brother, and even the dog were there, waiting for him. And if he believed it with such certainty, who am I to say it wasn't true? That night, I left the hospital with my head buzzing with questions. And I knew I wouldn't be able to stop searching for answers. But what came next was even more impossible to ignore. The fourth story involves a child, and to this day it's the hardest to tell without crying. Her name was Ana Luisa. She was only 9 years old and was hospitalized in the children's ward because of an aggressive leukemia that was no longer responding to treatment. Her family had decided to stop chemotherapy and focus only on her comfort in her final days. It was heartbreaking to see that little girl, so small and fragile, knowing that her time was running out. I didn't work directly in pediatrics, but sometimes I was called in to provide support because the team was overwhelmed. And on one of those nights, I was scheduled to be on call there. Ana Luisa was awake when I entered the room. She was sitting on the bed, playing with a worn-out teddy bear that she took everywhere. "Hi, Anna," I said, entering slowly. "How are you feeling?" She looked at me with those big, tired eyes and gave a weak smile. "I'm fine. A little tired, but everything's all right." I sat in the chair next to her bed. "Your mother went to rest for a little while, she'll be right back. Do you want me to stay here with you?" "I want to," she said. And then, after a silence, she asked, "Do you believe in angels?" I was surprised. "Angel? Why are you asking that?" "Because I have one here with me," she replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Is there an angel here?" "Where?" Ana Luisa pointed to the corner of the room, near the window. "There. He's always there. He's very beautiful. He shines a little, you know. Like he has a little light inside him." I looked to the side. I didn't see anything. But the way she spoke, with such certainty, with such tranquility, I knew she was seeing something. "And what does he do?" I asked. "He just stays there. Sometimes he smiles at me. He doesn't speak, but I know he's watching over me. My mother doesn't believe me when I talk about him, She thinks I'm delirious because of the medication. But I know he's real. I held her little hand, which was so cold, so small. I believe in you, Anna. Her eyes lit up. Really? Seriously? And you know what? I think you're lucky. Having an angel watching over you is something very special. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen. I know. I'm not afraid to die because of him. He told me it won't hurt. He said it'll be like going to sleep and waking up in a much better place. Oh my goodness, I couldn't hold back the tears. I tried to hide them, but they just flowed. And Ana Luisa, who is 9 years old, reached out her little hand and wiped away my tear. Don't cry, Auntie. I'll be okay. The angel promised me. I stayed with her all night. We talked about her favorite cartoons, about school, about the teddy bear her grandfather had given her for her last birthday. And every now and then, she would look at the corner of the room and smile, as if receiving a silent confirmation that everything was going to be all right. Ana Luisa died 2 days later. It was morning, with her mother holding her hand, while the sun streamed through the window. The nurse who was in the room told me that, seconds before she passed, Ana Luisa looked at the corner where she always said the angel was, smiled, and whispered, "I'm ready." I couldn't work for the rest of that day. I went to the break room and cried alone for an hour. But they weren't just tears of sadness. It was a strange mixture of pain and relief. Because deep down, I knew that girl had gone in peace. She had seen something that we couldn't see. And that thing had prepared her for what was to come. Since then, whenever a patient tells me they're seeing someone, I no longer doubt them. I just listen. Because who am I to say that what they're experiencing isn't real? But what was to come would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality. The fifth story happened during a night shift that I'll never forget. It was a Friday, the end of the shift, and the hospital was quieter than usual. There was a new patient in the intensive care unit, a 54-year-old man named Marcos, who had been admitted after a severe stroke. He was in an induced coma, connected to a lot of machines, and his family was in the waiting room, praying for him to wake up. I was doing my rounds checking the rooms when I passed by his room. And that's when I saw it. The door was ajar, and through the crack I saw something that made my heart stop. There was a light in the room. It wasn't the light from the machines, it wasn't the light from the hallway. It was a soft, golden light that seemed to come from inside the room itself, near Marcos's bed. And there was a figure there. I swear to God I saw it. It was like a silhouette, translucent, made of light, leaning over his bed. I stood paralyzed in the hallway, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. And then the figure turned toward me. It didn't have a defined face, but I felt it was looking at me. And then, in the blink of an eye, the light disappeared. It vanished completely, as if it had never existed. I pushed open the door and rushed into the room. Marcos was still there, motionless, connected to the machines. Everything was exactly as it should be. But the air in the room was different. It was warmer, denser, with a faint floral scent I couldn't identify. I checked all the monitors, all the vital signs. Everything was stable. I left the room trembling. I went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and tried to calm down. I thought I was just too tired, that it had been an optical illusion, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. 2 hours later, Marcos woke up from the coma. It was a completely unexpected recovery. The doctors were shocked because, given his condition, no one expected him to wake up so soon, if he would wake up at all. But he did wake up. And when he finally managed to speak, a few hours later, the first thing he said to his family was, "I saw my brother. He was by my side all night." His brother had died 3 years earlier in a motorcycle accident. And Marcos described everything, the clothes his brother was wearing, the way he smiled, the feeling of peace he felt when he realized his brother was there. He told me it wasn't my time yet, Marcos recounted, with tears in his eyes. He said I had to go back, that my family still needed me. When I heard that, I almost fainted. Because I knew. I knew that what I had seen in that room wasn't my imagination. It was his brother. It was that luminous presence leaning over the bed, watching over him, keeping him alive until he could come back. I never told anyone at the hospital that I had seen that light. But I began to realize that I wasn't the only one. Other nurses, other doctors, everyone had at least one story of something strange they had seen or felt, but no one spoke openly for fear of being ridiculed. It was like a collective secret that we all kept. And I began to understand that there is a very thin veil between our world and what comes after. And sometimes, at certain moments, that veil opens. And some people are able to see through it. But what I didn't know yet was that this veil was going to tear completely apart right in front of me. The sixth story is the most disturbing and at the same time the most comforting of all that I witnessed before my own experience. And it involves not just one patient, but a collective event that several people, including myself, witnessed at the same time. It was a Sunday morning, around 6 o'clock. The hospital was calm, that quiet that always comes before the day's activity begins. I was at the nursing station finishing filling out some reports when I heard a sound coming from the end of the corridor. It was a sound of voices, many voices, as if there were a crowd talking quietly. I found it strange because that corridor was in the geriatric ward, where most of the patients were bedridden and could barely speak. I got up and went to check. And as I got closer, the sound became clearer. It was voices singing. Singing a song I knew, an old lullaby, the kind grandmothers sing. And the sound was coming from the room of Dona Mariana, an 87-year-old woman who was terminally ill, expecting the end at any moment. When I arrived at her bedroom door, what I saw made me stop completely. There were people in the room. Many people. But they weren't real people, they weren't people I could touch. They were translucent figures, made of soft light, all around Dona Mariana's bed. Men, women, even children, all singing that lullaby, all looking at her with love. And Dona Mariana was awake. She was sitting on the bed, smiling, with her hands outstretched as if she were trying to touch those presences. And she sang along. Her voice was weak, but she sang. I stood paralyzed at the door, unable to go in, unable to go out. And then another nurse, Carla, came up behind me. She was about to say something, but stopped when she looked into the room. And she saw it too. I know she saw it because she gripped my arm tightly and whispered, "My God, what is this?" We both stood there, frozen, watching. And then the figures began to disappear, one by one, as if dissolving into thin air. The last to vanish was that of a woman who had been closest to Dona Mariana, caressing her face. And when that woman disappeared, Dona Mariana lay back down on the bed, closed her eyes, and sighed deeply. Carla and I rushed into the room. We checked her vital signs. Her heart was still beating, but it was weak. Dona Mariana opened her eyes again, looked at me, and smiled. "They came to get me," she said, her voice calm. "My whole family. Even my husband, who died 40 years ago. Even my parents. Even my little sister who died as a baby. They all came. They sang me the song my mother used to sing when I was little." I held her hand, which was warm and soft. "Aren't you afraid? Fear?" "No, daughter. I'm happy. I'm happy because now I know I won't be alone. They're waiting for me. And it's going to be beautiful. I felt it. It's going to be beautiful." She died an hour later. It was the most peaceful death I've ever seen. No pain, no struggle, no fear. Just a final sigh and a smile on her face. Then, Carla and I sat in the break room to try and process what we had just seen. And we discovered that it wasn't just us. The nursing technician who was in the hallway had also heard the music. A cleaning lady who passed by the room swore she saw lights coming out of the door. Everyone had realized that something extraordinary was happening, but no one could explain what. From that day on, I completely stopped doubting. Because I wasn't alone. Other people saw it too. And if several people witnessed the same thing at the same time, how can it be just imagination? How can it be just a hallucination? At that moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that there is something beyond death. Something that comes to get us. Something loving, kind, familiar. But I hadn't yet experienced it firsthand. I hadn't yet pierced that veil with my own eyes. And when it finally happened, my whole world changed forever. What I'm about to tell you is something I never imagined I would experience. For all these years caring for others, listening to their stories, seeing their visions, I was always the observer. I was the one on the outside, watching, taking notes, trying to understand. But the day came when I myself crossed that line. It was 2 years ago. I was driving home after a particularly tiring night shift, traveling the highway I took every day. It was a foggy morning, one of those where you can barely see a few meters ahead. I must have been more tired than I realized, because I didn't see the car coming in the opposite direction. It had veered into my lane. And when I did see it, it was too late. The collision was violent. I remember the sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, the sharp pain in my chest when the airbag deployed. And then, silence. A silence so profound it seemed unreal. I opened my eyes and was standing outside the car. I could see everything, my car completely destroyed, the other car a few meters ahead, also smashed, smoke rising from both vehicles. And then I looked inside my car and saw myself. My body was trapped between the steering wheel and the seat, my head slumped to the side, bleeding. And I thought, my God, I'm dead. But I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange calm, as if it all made sense somehow. I looked around and realized the fog had lifted. The day was clear, sunny, beautiful. And people were approaching me. They weren't paramedics. They weren't living people. It was my grandmother. She had died when I was 16, but she was there, exactly as I remembered her, her short white hair, her gentle smile, her eyes full of love. And she reached out her hand to me. "Grandma," I said, unable to believe it. "Hi, my darling," she replied, and her voice was exactly as I remembered it. "You're safe now." I looked back at my body trapped in the car, and then I looked at her again.